Chapter 10 deals with information systems within the organization. And first off, let me comment, you'll notice a slightly different look to this chapter's presentation, and I'm trying a new look, and that'll be true for the remaining chapters in the course. First off, just review for this chapter, there's four main things that you need to take away from this chapter. You need to understand transaction processing systems, be able to explain the types of support information systems, and in particular the functional areas of the organization, and really understand the advantages and drawbacks to company-wide ERP systems. And actually the assignment for this week is to research some failed ERP implementations and to analyze what went wrong. A really important topic from this chapter is to understand ERP and the challenges with getting a new system implemented. And then lastly, going to look at the major business processes that are supported by the ERP system. So the first thing is transaction processing systems, abbreviated TPS. It's really very simple. You have a transaction, the system processes it, and sometimes you'll see the term OLTP just for online transaction processing. So some of the things that TPS system allow us to do is we can have real-time data collection. So the transaction occurs, it's immediately logged into the system so we can see what's happening right at the moment. And it can handle large volumes of data. One of the things, because we're utilizing the latest and greatest technology, is there can be built-in error checking and redundancy to prevent downtime. And that results in very accurate recording of the results. Security, of course, that's an issue. How secure is that information? That's a whole nother topic. And that also goes into the privacy and security. So let's go on to the next. Okay, functional area information systems. You'll remember this from week 1 in the class, that within an organization, each particular department tends to have their own information system that's been optimized just for them. Like the examples here, accounting and finance has one, marketing has one, production has one, HR has one. And so as we look at these information systems within an organization and an ERP system, we have to ensure that these are all linked together and working together. So some of the things that the finance and accounting system deals with is planning and budgeting. If you'll remember from BA101, one of the major reasons that small startup companies fail is cash flow. They can be very profitable, but if their cash flow is out of sync, it can make them insolvent to where they go out of business. And in order to maintain that cash flow, that financial planning, of course, budgeting is a huge part of that. The actual transactions that happen, the sales that are made, the costs, the inventory, everything, all that has to be managed and properly dealt with. Investment management is something you don't think about, but especially larger companies can at any given time end up with large amounts of cash. And you don't want the cash just sitting there doing nothing for you. If you have surplus cash for a period of time, you want to invest that. You want to make some money off of that. And so another part of the accounting system is managing the investments they've got. And a big one, control and auditing, especially after Sarbanes-Oxley. We have to really monitor the transactions that occur. There have to be controls in place to prevent misuse, and of course the periodic auditing. So just a little bit more about financial planning and budgeting. Another aspect of this is the economic forecasting. So sales is going to look to the finance department as well as others to say what is the economic outlook? How are things looking for Europe, for the US? And that all gets incorporated into the forecasts that both the finance department and the sales department come up with for looking at what's going to happen into the future. Where we mentioned that budgeting is a huge part of the finance department's reports and tools that they need from ERP. Another aspect is managing the financial transactions themselves. There's global stock exchanges. When you get with a larger company that's doing a lot of international business, you have to be concerned about that. How do you buy and sell stocks globally? If you're investing that cash I talked about earlier and you choose to invest in a foreign stock, all the issues around there. Multiple currencies. You sell something to a customer outside the US, are they going to pay you in dollars, or do they want to pay you in euros or some other currency? How do you manage those currencies and the fact that the value of that currency goes up and down all the time? Virtual close is another interesting concept. And the idea here is that periodically, for financial auditing purposes, you have to what's called close the books. You say, okay, no more transactions, we're done, stop. And then you add up all the expenses and the costs and everything else, and you come up with a net number. Otherwise, the numbers are constantly changing throughout the day. And so how can you come up with a number for the financial reports you have to give to the government and to investors? Virtual close allows you to electronically at any time take a snapshot and say, if we were to close the books today, what would our profit for the year be? And fortunately with computer systems, this is a pretty easy thing to do. Back in the days of ledgers where you had to literally close the book so that no more entries could be made, it was a very time-consuming and laborious process. Expense management automation deals with the primarily T&L, travel and living costs associated with your business. With a lot of organizations, this expense is a huge part of their budget. It's expensive to travel. You know, you've got airfare, you've got hotel room costs, rental cars, food expenses, and so you've got all these tons and tons of receipts. It can be very complex, time-consuming to manage. And so one of the things that a good ERP system does is to help automate that process to when employees are using corporate issued credit cards to automatically import the transactions from the credit card company into the expense management system, so it's very easy for the manager to approve and click, to really take some of the time and effort out of submitting an expense account. Back in the days where we had to do everything with paper receipts, and especially when I was traveling internationally, I had to convert. If I bought, breakfast in Paris and I paid in francs, then I had to convert that to US dollars to put on my expense account. It was very time consuming and cumbersome. So you mentioned earlier, control and auditing, very important aspect of this. And one idea is the budgetary control. When you create a budget, management approves you spending up to, but not exceeding, a certain dollar amount in particular categories. So the budgetary control keeps tabs on that and can alert management and managers when there's an issue where you're exceeding the budgeted amount in a certain area. Now, if management approves it, there's no problem exceeding your budget, but the idea is that you can't exceed it without them approving you to go beyond that budgetary limit. And oftentimes it'll be, okay, if you're going to overspend in that area, what area are you going to underspend in to compensate for it? So you have to find a way of funding your over expenditure. So we mentioned auditing. There's two basic purposes of the audits. One is internal, to just monitor and see how are we doing? Where are we spending our money? Is this the way we want to be spending our money? Another purpose of the audit is to see the financial health of the organization. Are things going well? Are we where we need to be? And that really plays into the next point, financial ratio analysis. If you'll remember from BA101, when we talk about the various ratios that are monitored and tracked and reported to investors so that investors can see, is this a company I want to invest in? Are they healthy? What's their debt to asset ratio? There's literally dozens of different financial ratios that are calculated to determine the financial health of the particular company. So this is an important part of the finance department. Now, operations management, this is the people that actually make a product that gets sold. This is where quote unquote real work is done in the organization. There's a lot of logistics and materials management, especially if you're a large manufacturing operation. You may assemble some parts in one building and then they have to get moved over to another building to have another operation done. And then back to, another building and so on. So you have to manage just how the materials flow through your organization. And like I say, it can be very complex. And of course, inventory management is extremely important. If you're coming up to the Christmas buying season, you don't want to be out of toys. And as a manufacturer, you know your customers are going to be placing these big orders. You want to be able to support them. But on the other hand, you don't want to have a bunch of items sitting on the shelf gathering dust. So controlling the amount of inventory that management has agreed, most organizations, they will determine and say, okay, we will allow you to overstock, to carry a stock of this amount of product, but not more than that. Or they'll set safety stock levels, which says don't let the stock of this item ever drop below this threshold, because we always want to be able to respond to a spot order of at least this many units. Another aspect is quality control. Ideally, you build quality into your product, but we all know stuff happens. Machines break. Workers, leave the company and you bring on new people that aren't fully trained and they make mistakes. So we have to have something in place that helps us maintain that consistent level of quality. And so the tools we have here with monitoring the production times, how long is it taking to make this item? Why is it taking twice as long to make this item this week as it did compared to last week? Those are all things, all bits of data that get fed into the quality control system so we can identify if there are some issues we need to work on. And of course, planning, production, and operations. What typically happens is sales will generate a forecast and say, this is what we're going to sell next year. Then production has to take that sales forecast and say, in order to build that quantity of those particular items, I will require this many workers, this many machines, And then they look at it and say, so what do I have available with my existing workforce and the existing machines in my manufacturing facility? Can I do that, or do I need to start hiring now for a ramp up starting in 3 months? Do I need to place an order for equipment? Some equipment can have 12 to 18 month lead time, and so you really have to be thinking ahead so that when the increased capacity is required, you have everything in place. And again, this is something ERP helps you plan out and see what activities do you need to be taking today to prepare for tomorrow. And more today, we're seeing computer integrated manufacturing where robotic equipment is replacing and doing some of the manual tasks that were previously done by people. Now, you can debate back and forth, is that a good or a bad thing? But the point is, if your organization is utilizing this computer integrated manufacturing tools, these robotics, you need software that is keeping track of the programs that are fed down to the device to perform their particular steps. And the last one is an interesting one, product life cycle management. Every product has an introduction. That's pretty obvious. When do you introduce a product? You've got it ready to go, and so you launch it. What's not as obvious is, when do you stop making that product? When do you say, it's just not worth selling this product anymore? There's a lot of factors go into that. What's the current selling price of it? As products get older, they tend to have the price go down. So we're not making as much profit as we did before. What's the current sell price? What's our cost of manufacturing to make it? Are we making enough of a margin on that, or would we be better off investing that human resource and those machines to build a more profitable product? And then you have the other factor that feeds into that is some products have very expensive tooling required to make them. Some of the mold tools can cost $500,000 to $1 million for the tool. Those tools can only make a limited number of parts, and then they have to be completely refurbished and rebuilt. So is your tool on its last leg? You're getting down to the point where you're going to have to invest $100,000 to $200,000 to refurbish it, and is it worth it for the amount of sales that it's generating? In that product line, those are all things that go into the product life cycle management, to where a product manager and management decide it's time to kill a product. HR is a big user of an ERP system. They have information, a lot of data they need to keep track of. Recruitment's a huge one. And you think, well, when you want to recruit someone, you just advertise. But wouldn't it be great if you have a new position opens up and you go, we interviewed someone last month for a different position and they weren't an ideal fit, but this is a perfect fit for them. Let's get back in touch with them because we really liked them. We didn't have the right fit, the right job for them at the time, but now we do. And so keeping track of those attributes of the people that they've talked to, interviewed with, so that they can find them quickly in the future if there's an opportunity where they want to talk to them about and see if they're interested. Another big aspect, though, is development. And what's meant by here is development of the employees. There's always room for improvement. You can always improve the knowledge of employees through training seminars, outside courses, a variety of materials. And so keeping track of what individuals have been trained on what products, what processes, what tools, what concepts, so that you can work with the manager of that department for a training program for the year for the specific individuals involved. And of course, HR is involved in the whole idea of compensation and department needs, staffing, of saying, our workload has increased, we need to bring on more people. So certainly all the payroll employee records. You have to report sales, not sales, you have to report salaries to the state and feds for taxes. You may have in some areas where you're paying local taxes as well based on payroll. Administering the benefits. This is the medical insurance and any other supplementary benefits that a company offers, like 401ks and 401k matches. Some companies pay for getting your advanced degree in college. So keeping track of all of that and having a record of the employee. How did they perform last year? What did their peers say? Were there any issues that came up? Were there conflicts that had to be resolved? So you've got a history of how that employee has performed within the organization. In this chart out of the book, what I'd like you to take away from is that there's really, when we're talking about functional areas, there's three major themes here. Strategic. This is, I'm looking forward to the future. I'm planning a strategy that's going to get us where we want to be. Tactical is, what activities do I need to take right now, today, to make that future happen? And then operational are all the tools that are used to allow us to do those tactical activities. Okay, so let's look a little bit more about ERP systems. With ERP, again, remember that's Enterprise Resource Process. There's some major modules. The financial management, as I mentioned earlier, is a big one. We talked about operations management as a big one, and HR. We just covered those three are the major, what are called core modules of any ERP system. But there are some extended ERP modules too that are very important to your organization. One you hear a lot about is CRM, Customer Relationship Management. As we've talked about, as a customer, no one wants to be treated like just a number. They want to feel like they have a human relationship. And so maintaining data about your customers so we can improve the relationship, it's a huge part in any sales organization for any company. Supply chain is another major one. Especially in a global economy, most companies are not making their products based solely from local vendors that are providing things to them. They are probably buying components, sub-assemblies from all around the country and all around the world. And so managing that relationship of all the vendors that are involved in the supply chain is a big deal. If you've got 100 different vendors supplying parts going in to make a piece of equipment, if one vendor fails to deliver on time, it prevents you from finishing the product. And you can't sell a product that's 99% done. It just doesn't work. So very important to manage that. And involved in that supply chain management are things like quality audits, looking at the financials of those vendors. Are those vendors in risk of going out of business? If so, do we have a backup vendor that we can switch to in a hurry? Business intelligence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, in particular dashboards. It's a really important concept of providing, we go back to week 1, remember when we talked about going from data to information to knowledge. Business intelligence presents data in a format where we can make decisions in our business environment, and so it's a very important aspect. Just about any company today is involved in e-business, and while you could use a totally separate platform for your e-commerce, more and more businesses are incorporating and using the module of e-commerce that comes with their ERP system because it facilitates the flow of information. You don't have to import data from one system to another, and it's so you see a lot of companies are doing that now, integrating everything, and that's really what this chart the author is trying to show. You've got the ERP basic database in the center here, and then you've got all these modules around the outside that have been optimized for the particular organization within your company. So the accounting module, the HR module, the sales customer relationship module. So just to summarize some of the major benefits of ERP systems. A properly implemented ERP system provides the organization a lot of flexibility and agility to be able to make changes and react to market changes quickly. You know, we can have there's a lot of dynamics, especially in a global economy. Sales start taking off in Italy. We didn't see that coming, so we've got to shift our manufacturing focus to supplying the items that are sold in Italy. A good ERP system assists you in being able to reconfigure your plan and restructure it and to make changes midstream. The key one that I see from ERP is this decision support. You know, one of the things that can be very frustrating, you get to a meeting in a company and someone says, I think. Well, whoop-de-doo, you think. Where's the data to back up your opinion? And ERP systems really help you with that in providing data. So you look at it, and then what you're talking about is not a personal opinion, but really what you're saying is, I think the data is showing us this. And that really helps in us to make better decisions. We've already talked about the quality. The ERP system can really help us flag when we have some quality issues so we can deal with it. And that relates a lot to efficiency. Some of our previous inefficiencies in manufacturing organizations where it took too long to generate reports, to make timely decisions, and so we did things very inefficiently. Being able to have rapid decisions and rapid access to data allows us to be much more effective, and that translates to efficiency. However, there are some issues. ERP systems really are based on the best practices. So when a company writes and develops an ERP system, they design it around a company that's using best practices, best industry practices to run their business. Now, if your business isn't following those best practices, but the ERP manufacturer assumed you were, and you try and implement it, you can run into some real problems. And so I would actually change this slide from what the publisher has, and instead say, you must change your methods of achieving business activities, because when you go to implement a new ERP system, it is almost a guarantee that some of your current processes do not align well with the ERP process expectations. And where a lot of time and cost comes into implementing ERP is when companies go back to the ERP supplier and say, would you make some custom modifications for us to this particular module? Danger, danger, that is a bad decision. That is a road you don't want to go down to. It is much easier in the long run and even in the short run to change your business to better match the ERP system. So you need to do your homework when you're looking at ERP systems to make sure that the one you've chosen is as closely aligned to your current business as possible, but just assume you're going to have to change something. Even with a good, easy, seamless implementation of ERP, it's expensive. There's no two ways around it. The software itself is hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $1 million just for the software. Then you're going to have all the employee time involved in training and implementing and putting it in place. It just is a very major undertaking. So consequently, there are some reasons that things go wrong with ERP, with the implementation. One of the main ones that happens is that the organization doesn't get all the people within their organization that are going to be affected by this involved in the planning and development. This can cause the ERP implementation team to have overlooked a key part. It can also result in the employees rebelling against using the new ERP system. And so that failure of involving all the correct people in the process is a big cause of a lot of the failures. Another is trying to do too much too fast in the conversion process. It takes time. And where a number of ERP implementations have failed, senior management, board of directors, whoever said, we have to have this done in time for the shareholder meeting. So I know you're telling me it takes 2 years, but you've got 14 months. You have to make it happen in 14 months. And not taking no for an answer. And of course, training is a big deal. This is a new process. If we don't invest in the sufficient amount of training of our employees in the new work tasks, they're going to be resistant to use it. They're going to make mistakes. It's going to cause us to not be able to fulfill customer orders. We're going to lose business. A lot of things go wrong. And the last one is really failing to do adequate testing. You look at the companies that were successful, and oftentimes you will see that they bought additional hardware so that they could run both the old system and the new system at the same time, so that they could do live testing on the data on the new system while they were still using the old system, so that they could find out any problems before they flip the switch. It's expensive to do a dual system like that, but the cost of not doing it can be enormous. And the assignment for this chapter is to research some major companies who failed in their ERP systems. And what you will find when you do a quick Google search on failed ERP implementations, there are some really big names that have had colossal failures that cost them millions of dollars. And it's interesting that you'll see that a lot of them you could distill down to what went wrong in that particular failure, and it'll be one of these 4 things. It's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science, but it's amazing how some of these large companies made such stupid decisions. It was unnecessary, but very, very costly. So 3 major advantages of cloud-based ERP. And this is opposed to having an ERP server installed at your company site. So instead of running a server-based on-site ERP system, but using cloud-based. Well, obviously, if it's cloud-based, then you can access it as an employee anywhere. As long as you got internet access and the appropriate login, you can access your system. That would have been wonderful, especially when I was doing international travel, if I could have had real-time, easy access to our ERP system. But at that time, the ERP system we had, it was an IBM mainframe housed in the physical location, and I couldn't access it remotely. When you do cloud-based, it's the cloud-based ERP supplier that is invested in all the hardware and software. And so you don't have any of that. Now you will have some expense associated with, the on-premise implementation in terms of training your employees, but you're not having to have someone go around typically and install a bunch of applications on the computers to find out that, well, this computer is too old and it won't run the software, and this one doesn't have enough memory, and this one the hard drive is full. And you typically can avoid a lot of those types of issues. And this is a really important one too. You want your business to grow and expand. With a cloud-based system, you can add on additional modules, you can increase the capabilities. It's a lot easier to upgrade your system than when you have a server-based hardware that is located on your premise. So, problems with cloud-based ERP systems? Well, the author identified, he said it's not clear the cloud-based ERP systems are more secure than on-premise systems. Now, I would take issue with the author on this, and I would instead say that recent events show that cloud-based ERP systems are not more secure. And so the fact that they are not secure is a big deal. Companies that adopt cloud-based ERP systems do give up some of the control. It's a strategic part of their company, but it's not maintained by their IT department. It's the ERP vendor IT that is managing this and overseeing it, and so you're relinquishing control. And if you're working with a very reputable, well-established company, maybe that's not a big deal. But it can be an issue because it's now something you have no control over, you're not aware of, you don't know what's going on behind those doors. And so consequently, when you do have a problem, you can't deploy your resources. All you can do is contact the ERP company and say, this is really important to us. Do you have everyone, all hands on deck working on resolving this? And they say, well, yeah, sure, we're taking care of you. And you have no way of knowing if they've applied all the resources or if they're working on other issues or whatever. So again, you've let go of control of a really important aspect of your business. The business process itself, what's shown here is just, one of the things that is really big in production is this idea of procurement and production. Procurement is the idea that it takes stuff to make our things. Even if we're a software company, the software engineers require pencils, notebooks, USB drives, all kinds of, so there's all these things that purchasing needs to obtain in order for the organization to deliver our particular product or service. And of course, managing the production process itself. Those are both very large parts of ERP. Let's see. I already talked about that. So reports. This is a big thing for ERP. Certainly the routine reports, having them automated and so they're generated doesn't take a lot of effort. That's great. But there's all these ad hoc on-demand reports, spur of the moment, saying, gee, I wonder what our sales were, of XYZ to this part of the country last year. And someone says, gee, I don't know. We've never segmented out that part of it. Let's generate a report. What's meant here with the drill down report is exactly that. We know sales are flat for this quarter, and we're going to say, well, that doesn't tell me a lot to say that sales are flat. Did we lose market share in any other areas? So we're going to drill down to see, okay, well, we grew in this area, we grew in this area. The reason that our sales overall are flat is because we totally tanked in this one area over here. Key indicator reports. Every business has a lot of key indicators. Sometimes those are included in routine reports, but there may be some key indicator reports that you don't want to necessarily run every week, but just when you need them. You just say, hey, I was wondering how we're doing, in this particular area. It's a predefined report, but you're not necessarily always generating it. Comparative reports are some of the ones I found really useful. So comparing our sales the same time last year to this year, how do things look? So we're gauging things by comparing results to something that's historical, or comparing to our competitors, or to the industry. When I worked at Shindawa, we purchased an industry report that showed how the sales were in each of the major categories where we had products. And so we could compare, okay, industry-wide, this area grew 12%. We grew 8%. Why did we grow less than the industry? Or in this particular product line, industry growth was 20%, we grew 35%. Why? How come we grew at 35%? We must have done something right. Or did we underprice the product and we left money on the table? So comparative reports, very useful. But to me, the most useful report are the exception reports. And this is where it says, if our quality is one failure per 100,000, I don't care. Don't bother giving me a quality report every day that says our quality was 0.05 per 100,000. Just let me know if it ever exceeds the limit we've set. So the reports only show me the things that exceed the parameters that we've set on some of these key indicators. The other key indicators we don't need to look at. They're exactly where we expected them to be, so don't waste any time looking at them. Focus our efforts and energy on the exception reports themselves. That's Chapter 10, Information Systems, and we'll cover a few more things in class, a few videos, but the ERP assignment really, I think, is the one that I enjoy reading the most, and I hope you'll enjoy seeing some of the big names and the tremendous mistakes they made.